Hello, I'm Ron Strickland. This webcast is one of a series in which I'm presenting some brief lectures and commentaries on topics from the courses I teach in literature and cultural studies. This particular installment is on Joseph Conrad's novel, Heart of Darkness. In earlier webcasts, I've said some things about Conrad's relationship to the growing disenchantment with the European Enlightenment among artists and intellectuals at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. And I've discussed some features of Conrad's distinctive narrative method in Heart of Darkness. Here I'll look at some specific passages from the novel, keeping in mind some of those points that I made in the earlier videos. So Heart of Darkness is a framed narrative. Heart of Darkness begins with a small group of friends, business associates, the narrator of the introduction, presumably Conrad, a director of a company, a lawyer, an accountant, and Charlie Marlow. Marlow, we learn, is the only one of the group who still follows the sea. He's the only one who is still in close touch with the places where the company actually makes its money. The narrator reflects upon all the men and all the ships that have sailed out from the Thames onto the ocean. The great knights of the sea, he says. He mentions Sir Francis Drake, the captain of the Golden Hind, the heroic privateer who attacked Spanish ships, returning with their treasure from the Americas, stealing their gold and silver and delivering a portion of it to Queen Elizabeth in the 16th century. And he mentions Sir John Franklin, captain of an expedition in search of the Northwest Passage in 1845. This was a failed mission. Franklin and his crew never returned. Note the ambivalent character of these two examples. Drake is a hero, but also a thief. Franklin embarked upon a heroic mission, but the mission was a failure. With these examples, Conrad's narrator seems to be setting a tone of regret and repentance about the driving force of heroic adventure, exploration, and conquest. As the narrator finishes setting the scene, Marlow suddenly speaks. And this also, said Marlow suddenly, has been one of the dark places of the earth. Marlow is reflecting upon what must have been the experience of the Roman invaders, sent to take control of the British Isles in the year 43 of the Common Era, sailing up the Thames into what must have seemed like a wild, uncivilized place. Cold, gray, and dark, the opposite of the sun-drenched Mediterranean climate. Marlow reflects, imagine the feelings of a commander of a fine trireme in the Mediterranean, ordered suddenly to the north, run overland across the Gauls in a hurry. Imagine him here, the very end of the world, a sea the color of lead, a sky the color of smoke, a kind of ship about as rigid as a concertina, and going up this river with stores or orders or what you like, sandbanks, marshes, forests, savages, precious little to eat, fit for a civilized man, nothing but Thames water to drink, here and there a military camp lost in a wilderness like a needle in a bundle of hay, cold fog, tempests, disease, exile, and death. Death skulking in the air, in the water, in the bush. Land in a swamp, march through the woods, and in some inland post feel the savagery, the utter savagery had closed round him. All that mysterious life of the wilderness that stirs in the forest, in the jungles, in the hearts of wild men. There's no initiation either into such mysteries. He has to live in the midst of the incomprehensible, which is also detestable. And it has a fascination, too, that goes to work upon him. The fascination of the abomination. You know, imagine the growing regrets, the longing to escape, the powerless disgust, the surrender, the hate. The narrator recognizes with resignation that he's about to hear another one of Marlow's inconclusive experiences. Marlow, jobless and ashore, nothing to do, solicits the help of the women in quotes. His aunt finds him a position as the captain of a steamer, a small steamboat, going inland up the Congo River. It's a rare freshwater experience for Marlow. His aunt represents Marlow as a very special young man, as someone of special talents, someone fitted for the civilizing mission of the colonial enterprise. Marlow describes going to apply for the job, a trip to a city that always reminded him of a whited sepulchre. The description puts me in mind of Brussels. Here's a photo of the distinctive architecture of the Grand Place in Brussels, and a photo of a medieval sepulchre. You'll see the resemblance, I think. Marlow describes his impressions of the company's offices. The streets are strangely silent, no sign of business being conducted. 2 women sit knitting in the outer office. They seem to have no purpose other than guarding the door. To me, they seem to symbolize the fates of classical mythology. The fates also spin yarn and cut the thread to determine the duration of one's life. So, these women project a vaguely ominous mood. Marlow says, "Often, far away there, I thought of these 2, guarding the door of darkness, knitting black wool as for a warm pall. One introducing continuously to the unknown, the other scrutinizing the cheery and foolish faces with unconcerned old eyes. Ave, old knitter of black wool, morituri te salutam." Not many of those she looked upon ever saw her again. Not half, by a long way. Well, Marlow goes in and he submits to a perfunctory interview with the director. Marlow recalls, "The great man himself. He was 5'6", I should judge, and had his grip on the handle end of ever so many millions. He shook hands, I fancy, murmured vaguely, was satisfied with my French. Bon voyage. In about 45 seconds, I found myself again in the waiting room with the compassionate secretary, who, full of desolation and sympathy, made me sign some document. I believe I undertook, amongst other things, not to disclose any trade secrets. Well, I am not going to. This non-disclosure agreement, in which Marlow promises not to disclose any trade secrets, is going to take on a special significance by the end of the novel, because we'll learn that these so-called trade secrets are not any particular business practices, but instead the brutal savagery with which the company conducts its operations in Africa. But Marlow continues his story. "I began to feel slightly uneasy. You know I am not used to such ceremonies, and there was something ominous in the atmosphere. It was just as though I had been led into some conspiracy. I don't know, something not quite right, and I was glad to get out. In the outer room, the 2 women knitted wool feverishly." Then Marlow has a visit with the company doctor. A simple formality, he's told. The doctor has a caliper or some sort of a measuring device, and he asks to measure Marlow's cranium. He seems to be conducting some sort of scientific experiment to determine just what sort of a crazy fool would take a job like this. So Marlow gets the job, and he describes his last farewell to his aunt. Marlow says, "One thing more remained to do, say goodbye to my excellent aunt. I found her triumphant. I had a cup of tea, the last decent cup of tea for many days. In the course of these confidences, it became quite plain to me I had been represented to the wife of the high dignitary, and goodness knows to how many more people besides, as an exceptional and gifted creature, a piece of good fortune for the company, a man you don't get hold of every day. Good heavens, and I was going to take charge of a 2-penny halfpenny river steamboat with a penny whistle attached. It appeared, however, I was also one of the workers with a capital. You know, something like an emissary of light, something like a lower sort of apostle. There had been a lot of such rot let loose in print and talk just about that time, and the excellent woman, living right in the rush of all that humbug, got carried off her feet. She talked about weaning those ignorant millions from their horrid ways, till, upon my word, she made me quite uncomfortable. I ventured to hint that the company was run for profit. With that point, I'll wrap this one up. As always, if you have questions or comments, send me an email.